Previously on Toxic Garage Customs.
Yeah, there's a lot of work here. This is like we had to do to that other door. This door should really be replaced, but we don't have a replacement door. So I suspect we're going to be rebuilding the entire bottom of this, like we did to that. Just doesn't float my boat. Well, I'm a lot happier with that already. Happy with the way that's coming up. Get some primer onto some stuff. Next thing I am going to do is flip this over and cut this panel off so we can look inside. Then I'm going to call it a day.
G'day everyone, welcome back. I'm Todd, this is Toxic Garage Customs, and you are in the Toxic Garage Customs workshop. Good to have you back again. I hope you enjoy this video. We're on to part 2 of rebuilding the GMC door. In the last video we pretty much rebuilt an entire corner and the base of the door, and in this video we move along and we start doing the skin on the outside and some rust proofing and all that sort of stuff. I can't give away too much, otherwise you don't need to watch the video. So why don't you grab yourself a cold beverage and sit down, make yourself comfortable, put your feet up and watch the video. And I will catch you at the end. That came off easy enough. Looking on the inside here, so starting from this corner here, this is that brace that I plug welded back in. The corner that we rebuilt here, so you can see the penetration on the inside. You can see the weld coming through, down through this part here. So while I've ground it pretty flat, where are we? Ground it pretty flat on that side, you can see there is still penetration of weld on the inside there. That little patch, etc, etc, etc. So this is that long bead. It's all sorts of burnt stuff. I could smell this stuff. It's like rust proofing or something. Worked well, didn't it? So there's all sorts of stuff in here, but I can give that a clean up. But as I said, now I've got really good access to it. This, I suspect, was not attached before, because I'm pretty sure I didn't just cut it off. Nope, there is no remnant of that being attached. So that would have been a nice rattle in the door. So I think we will weld that back on. Yeah, it's just been cut straight through. We'll weld that back on. That'll be good. Clean all this up. As I said, we'll give it all a really good clean up, and then we will throw some primer on there on the inside and all that sort of gear. So happy with that. Yep, I think I've got most of the evils out of there. Nice. The one final thing I'm going to do before I call it a day is Well, firstly, I've gone through and I've scratched out a lot of that sound deadener just with a chisel, and I've vacuumed it out. When you try and weld and that stuff's there, it just contaminates the weld and you won't have success. It'll pop, it'll fart, and you'll just have a contaminated weld. I know from experience it's all on the back of this door as well. So I've gone through and scraped it off with a chisel, but I'm not going to be able to separate, I can feel great chunks of it behind here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to run along with my flat disc and just tidy this edge up so I don't cut myself. And then I'm going to get some thinners on a rag, and I'm going to clean up all along here just for about this far, just so that it doesn't wick through into my weld. And I'm going to just give it a clean up down here as well. Not because I'm worried about the welding, although I do have to do some welding around here, and I do have to do some welding here. But I'm doing it so that I can get some primer to stick there. So I'm going to give it a clean up, and then I may spray some primer around. But I think it looks good. Got that cleaned up good enough for me. Particularly clean along the inside of that, impossible to show you, but I got a lot of stuff out from there. And I've given it all a clean up in there. Lots and lots of thinners to wipe it down. A little bit of a grind with some cleaning wheels and so on. And I've sprayed some weld through primer. I didn't need to use weld through primer. As it turns out, it's the only primer I've got that isn't mixed in a gun at the moment, so I'll put it in there. I'm going to leave this now, but when I come back to it next, which hopefully will be tomorrow, but we'll see, I'm going to put seam sealer along the back of all those welds, and I'll build the corners and do all that other stuff. But then the inside will be all prepared, and I've got to make the panel obviously, but I think that is a vast improvement on what we had. That's what came out. That's part of what came out. A lot better. Okay. I'm going to go for a drive. New day. You might be able to see from the debris on the ground behind me. It's been really, really strange weather here. Not that long ago it was storming, and it wasn't thundering but pouring with rain, and before that it was sunny. New South Wales, East Coast, this is mid-January, so you'll be aware there's been severe storms. We haven't had any internet for 5 or 6 days now. It's actually affecting my uploads of videos, and I can't listen to my streaming music, which is doing my head in because I listen to it while I'm working. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with what we're doing here. So, new day. What we have done, we've let this dry. So I'm just about to put some seam sealer on all these joints, as I said. So I use two main ones. So this Sikaflex 227 I find to be really good. There's others, but this is what I can get locally. It's a really good thing. Obviously just put it into a gun and pump it through, smear it around with your finger or whatever. And just recently I bought this one, which is a brush-on one. I bought it because I'd never used it and I thought I'd give it a try. I do prefer this in most instances, the tube, but this stuff's good. I'll just use this art brush, and I should be able to get in there nicely and just smear it around. All I'm basically trying to do is just seal up the back of those welds so that moisture can't get in there, so that rust doesn't start happening between the welds. So that's the purpose of that. So I'm going to do that in a minute, and then we can move along. And that's it. It is really sticky, runny, messy stuff. So gloves are a good idea, and just being careful not to carry your brush, drag your brush across areas where you're not trying to get this stuff, because it just ends up everywhere. So I've made sure that I have coated all of those joints nicely, got into every gap that I possibly can so that no moisture can get in there. It's beautiful, it's like art. Not. Something just to point out with this as well, this is 310 mil and this is a litre. So I guess in America that's a quart, and that's whatever that works out at, 12th. 27 bucks for a litre, and it's about the same price. I think it is about $27 or $28 for 310. So realistically, this is about more than 3 times more expensive than this. More practical. I do prefer it in some ways, but this is what I just used inside the door. So, you know, saves a lot of money buying it in that method. Almost every time I turn around in here, this lizard is somewhere beside me. I walk around the corner, he's there.
I pop around somewhere else, he's there. He frightens the life out of me because I don't expect him. But I've grown quite fond of him. I should probably name him. He's a skink, so we'll call him Simon. So, YouTube, welcome to Simon. Simon, this is YouTube. I have my sheet cleaned up, marked out. What I've done, I've allowed it to be wide enough to go from here to here, which is from this distance to this distance here. Everything else here was 140 mil, but then this pops up, so it makes it about 200 mil. So that's from this to here. This here is where I'm going to bend this flange around that tucks on to the bottom of the door here. And while it will only be about 15 or 20 mil, so with half to 3/4 of an inch, I've made this close to 2 inches, close to 50 mil, so that I've got metal to work with. I can bend it, I can lever it, and so on. Now what happens when you bend metal? So when I return this right the way back on itself, I'm going to lose 2 or 3 mil because of the thickness of the steel. So what that means is that if I don't allow for that, then what I'm aiming for is about a 1 mil gap. But if I end up with about a 3 or 4 mil gap, then it's going to be something, work with me, it's going to be something more like that. And you can't weld that. You remember I did the mark out. So this is my right template. So it comes from this side, and my left template comes from this side. And you'll remember that it had the angles that weren't 90-degree angles. You'll remember that from this point to this point is 990 mil. So what I did, I worked out how much steel I need in total. I've allowed this much for that flange on the bottom. I've just measured in, so I've got enough to create a flange on the side as well. Put a mark, laid that template there, marked it out. I now have that corner. Measured 990 mil along here, set the template there, transferred that up. I now have my corners, right angle, right location, and I have 990 mil from this line to this line. Everything that I need. What I now need to do is bend this flange on here. If you're wondering, that was 50 minutes work from the time I dragged the sheet of metal out. Oh no, sorry, from the time I marked it out. So what you just saw me do was use various bits of steel. So I put this down because my bench isn't flat and it's not solid, so that's a good lintel that I use often. And then I put the sheet metal on it, and I put a piece of angle iron over the top of it as another straight edge across the top, clamped it in place, and then bashed it down into a 90-degree angle. Then I took it and I flip it like this, and I use that sheet, but this is the same thing, so it's basically this is an offcut of this, and I put it in behind and then bent it down. Now you can see it's all dented and so on. That doesn't matter, that's on the inside, so that's on the flange side. But what that does, it bends the flange with enough room for a piece of sheet metal to slip in there. And you've probably already worked it out, so that can fit in there, because that sheet metal will be this sheet metal. So the skin will come along and then wrap around that, and that allows enough space to be able to fit that in. I went through and trimmed off the excess flange from the back, and I've cleaned the panel up, and I've got the flange tucked in under here, under there. I actually need to trim just a little spot there, just where there's some weld, it's holding it out. And I've used my 140mm reference mark, and it's sitting, this point is sitting down about 5mm, but this end I can get good, and it's just one lump of weld there. I've reused my templates to come back in to this point, and you'll notice I've got the arrow here that's telling me where I'm measuring from is the inside of this black line. So that's where my fold is going to start, but I'm going to work on one end first and then put it all back in place, get it all lined up, and then I'll fine tune where this one's going. My neighbour's mowing his lawn over there, so there's a bit of noise. So I'm going to pop this back off, flip it over, and you can see that's where I've cut that from, and it fits on nicely. I left 15mm there, so it gives a really nice flange, and as I said, it comes right the way up to this edge here, so it hides all of this as it's meant to. I've still got to go through and fix up these pie cuts and replace the corner sections and so on, but I can do that before installing this, but after I've finished doing this, finished making this. Now what I've got to do is I've got to relief this corner, because when I fold this over, otherwise I'm going to have 4 layers of steel here. So just from a point here, I'm just going to cut it off on a 45-degree angle, and then when I fold it over, it'll sort of join itself back somewhat. So I've got that marked, and probably I'll show you on a piece of cardboard, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut all of that off, and then I'm just going to cut the end of this off. And what it will do, it'll end up, basically you're cutting the whole corner off at 45 before it was folded. Now when I haven't got these flanges the same size, but if I fold that over and then fold that over, then you can see that comes around and you've just got this join just here. Now my flanges will both be the same thickness, so they'll both be 15mm. So afterwards I'll cut this down through here, and then that'll just be a nice neat corner, and it'll come together like that, as it should on a factory door. Something like that. I've got that cut, and I've just given it all a bit of a buzz up, just to get it clean, so that I can get some paint on it later. Now I'm just going to bend this on that line, as I stated before, I'll just use this little piece of metal here, but other than that, it's just going to be the same process as what I did with this bottom lip. This is the point where you hope you've got it all marked up well. So what I've worked out is that this point here is just there, and I've taken measurements, I won't bore you with it, 196mm. So what I am going to do is cut along here and down there to a distance, not all the way, just trying to match this in. Now I did consider, this panel, as it is at the moment, goes pretty much right the way to there. I did consider sort of bringing it down to this point here and just cutting it right the way along, but it's just a bit too close to this edge for my liking, and I think, as I said, any welds and so on that I can do
underneath the trim, I would prefer to do. So I'm going to stick with my original plan as far as that goes. So I'm going to cut this piece out and this piece, and the reason being I want to get that in there and get it fitting nice and right and tight. That's a bad Chad, mind you, that saying. So that it is sitting in there nice and snug, and I can get this line true and get my measurements right, so that I can work out exactly where I need to fold this, because I think it's going to be a little bit past this line in hindsight. So I'm going to cut this out. I'll cut down here, I'll creep up on it and hopefully get it right. Fantastic. So got this correct here. This is a little bit more rounded through here than what I'd like to. I'll try and sort that out once I've started fitting it. That's a separate issue. So this here, a little bit wide there, but I think if I just run the blade through here, just on the original door, I can close it up a bit. This cuts a little bit out, but I can just run the grinder through there to get it right. And this I've intentionally left about 145 millimeters here. I think that's what I left. Yeah, 145 millimeters. And the reason being is that this, I had cut off 140, so there'll be a 5 mil overlap. So what I'm hoping to do is have it sit like this as it is. I'll get it all held in place, and then I'll run the grinder through, and I'll cut probably through both of them so that they end up a perfect match to each other. I could just run the grinder along the edge of this, but sometimes you waver a bit. If you cut through both of them at the same time, then it comes out pretty good. Now, normally what I'd do there is cut it, tack it, cut it, tack it, cut it, tack it, but I will end up with a slither of metal inside the door. So I may just hold it all in place, cut it, take it all back off again, and then take that sliver of metal out and go from there. I'm not near that stage yet. I still need to, the reason I wanted to get all this fitting up as good as I could is so that I can bend this. Now if you look at that, that line is out, camera angle's a bit hard, it's about 3 millimeters. It's actually more like about that. So I need to bend this flange so that it fits exactly. If I make it too short, she ain't going to fit, or she's going to have a step in it. But the angle is right. So I'm really happy with the way this is coming up. At this point I'm being a little more accurate with my marking as well, so I'm starting to use a scribe, which is pinpoint accurate. So for example, I run this scribe along here, and then I can see exactly where this panel is sitting. I have got it in the right position at the moment. I can see exactly where this panel is sitting in regards to what I had originally allowed for. I'll do that in a second. I'll mark this corner out. So I just coloured in with some permanent marker, and then I scribed a line where it needs to be, eyeballing it off the line that I had there in the door, and then I've held my template in place just to see. And you can see, like I'm holding it away from the line, but you can see the line is right. So if I move that in there, we're all good. So that is the inside of my fold. All of my fold has to be on that side of the line. So this is the exact point that I want the fold to start. So let's have a look. Moment of truth. So I think that came up all right. As far as the shape of it looks, just a matter of whether it fits. So the moment of truth might be a little bit telling. As I said, I've still got to flatten this out. And that might work in my favour. When I flatten that out, hopefully it'll push this way a little bit. And the reason being is that it looks good here, not so good there. So I don't know why that happened, but we can fix it. So grabbing my template, what is the issue here? The issue is that I didn't bend it to exactly the same shape as the template. Okay, so look, end of the day, I'm not going to try and
straighten this out and redo it, it'll just end up a buckled mess. If I can't get this across further, what I'm going to need to do is I'll build this up with weld on the outside and grind it off. It'll come up okay. This still needs to come up about 5 mil as well, because you know it's meant to be up here, but now that I've shaped it, it can't get up past this point. That's okay. Overall, not too shabby. Finer adjustments, we'll get there. I don't think I'm going to get it any better than that. It measures 140 millimeters from here to here, 140 millimeters from here to here. That, as I said, I had to trim a little piece off there to get this. So I've got this up underneath that skin now. And this is an area from about here to here, or here to there, I'm going to have to build up. But that's okay. That's actually how you tighten up your gaps on your doors anyway, by welding it and grinding it. So it's no biggie there. But I'm very, very happy with the way that is looking. With that back in place and the door flipped over, we can see exactly what I need to finish off. So just that corner there and this corner area here. Well, another new day. The sun was shining a minute ago. Look at that. Mowed the lawn yesterday afternoon. You got to do what you got to do. Don't mind doing that. And guess what? My interwebs are back on, so I can listen to music. Okay, and upload videos, that'll be nice. Let's have a look at. So, I have made a couple of templates. Where am I? I've made a couple of templates. 1, 2. So this one, for example, will go just there. And the other one goes on the other side. Now what I've done, I've marked these out and I've just marked the shape pretty close to what it is, but I've allowed myself plenty of excess. Once again, just so I can trim it up afterwards. So I'll cut those and we'll start fitting them. They're ready to go. So that one fits nicely. A bit of extra excess metal there that I can trim off if need be. Same on this one here. So it's really handy having the door skin made, so I can really work to the shape of that as well as the shape that it's contacting on the inside edge. So now what I need to do, take the door skin off and then put these on. I've got to make sure that I get the right plane, so that's always a bit tricky, but I've got an edge to work to here and I've got an edge to work to there, so it is all quite flat plane through there, so I should be right. The fear is that when I weld onto curves and funny shapes and things that this is going to distort, so I just need to keep an eye on that, but there'll probably be a little bit of adjusting after I've welded it to get it right. I've started getting this corner in there, bit of splatter and so on, that's okay. Grinder and paint makes us the welder we ain't. Nah, it'll all fix up okay. This here, because I like making life difficult for myself, I actually managed to make this panel about 5 mil, quarter of an inch too short. So all I did was got a little offcut of metal, this piece here, and I cut a slither about the width that I needed, and it was longer than that, and I just held it in place and welded it away. And what it looks like from this side, I can't really see it. So yeah, just held that in place, no biggie, just welded around it. So there's a heap of weld there, I've got to grind it. Now what I've done, this piece I've just got sitting on top of the rounded lip that was there because it's all rusted below. So I've welded to the good metal. I've just got to trim a line through here so I can tap that down to join into this surface here so that it's on the same plane. And then when I flip the door over, there's all this leftover metal, all this stuff here that I'm going to cut off. So I'll come through and I'll cut around here, and then I'm going to put a bunch of weld in the back there as well, so that when I do shape this side, I don't blow holes in it because there'll be a chunk of weld on the other side. And at this point, when I do grind that, I actually like using a grinding disc, not a cutting disc, but a normal grinding disc, slightly older one. It's got a nice round shoulder on it, and you can get in there. Young guy next door is doing wheel stands on his dirt bike. Can jump in there and grind that off. It's about the only time I really use grinding discs, but they work well for that.
Got this side all welded in, welded up those pie cuts and across here. So I've just got to do a bit of shaping. I've actually looked at that. Oh, that doesn't look too bad, that plane through there. This is bowing down a bit through there. It needs to be straight, so that's easy. A bit of tinkering will get that a straight line, and this will give the curve that it's supposed to have through there. Looking good. And that side I used the grinding disc, as I said, and then I just went over it with a bit of a flap disc. So I'm ready to flip the, I'll grind that side, and then I'm ready to flip this over and start tidying up the other side. You'll see there's bits that need to be cut off. Looking at the other side here, we can see where I've got to take this out. So you can see where I've welded. So it gives me an indication of where to cut. So I'll creep up on it, come around there. And I don't mind if there's a very slight lip between the two and I can weld them together. But I don't want to leave this old stuff here because it's somewhere to rust out, somewhere to trap moisture. Just got to grind up a couple of these little welds along here. There is a little bit hole there that I cut with the grinder. And this here, so that lip through there, I can just grind off with a flat disc until I reach the actual corner. And then when I do, I can go through and run some weld. You can see where I've welded here. I don't think I need to take it right the way back there. I don't mind if there's a bit of lap there, as long as I seal it up with weld, and I'll put seam sealer over any of this as well. So that's all looking pretty good. And I've got to remember to attach that. On to the final stages. I ground all this up, and it's hard to tell where the sheet metal starts here and where it finishes there, but you can see where I cut it off, the old piece, and I ground it back with a flap disc. I'm not going to weld it, it's not necessary. I've got plenty of weld on the other side, which came up really well. So I'm just going to seam seal all around here, and I fixed a little spot here and I welded that brace on. And once again over here I ground it back, so it's all come up really nice. I'm satisfied that that is ready to do. Now I did also earlier on put some primer on the inside of the skin, mainly getting in underneath those lips. So it's ready to go. Once again, it's weld through primer. It's ready to go. And so I think I'm ready to pop this skin on after I put some seam sealer on. Pop this skin on and start joining the two together in holy matrimony. I'll just put a little bit of primer under these spots as well. Okay, seems like a good time to make a cup of coffee and let the paint that I'm about to do dry. Primed, seam sealed. I redid the original seam sealer, or the other seam sealer down the bottom as well. Don't try and be too clean with this stuff. Lay it on thick. So I'm going to put this skin on because I don't believe there is anything else I need to do. Started putting it up there. Seems to be going on okay. Only thing I need to do, I think I need to just trim down that part, the parts I just welded on. Just trim them on the sides just so that I can slide this along. It's probably just a little bit tight. So the excess metal, I'll just grind it off with the flap disc. We should be right. Going well. I started welding from this point. So what you've just been watching me do is I get a spot, I cut out this area here because what I needed was the two pieces to come together. There's still a slither of metal and it's literally about 3 mil that I'm cutting off from the new piece. So I'm running the blade along the side of the old metal. You may remember I was trying to work out how I was going to do that, but
So I'm travelling along the side of the old metal and cutting the new off. Now it's really important, if you're going to do this technique, you've got to have access to the other side to remove that slither however much you cut off. I've got a little hole in there that I can get in that I'm confident I'll be able to get this stuff out. So I started on this corner here and got it lined up, and I'll travel up here. So I've cut through here and I've welded to this point, and what I've got is 0 lippage. So between the two, absolutely no difference at all between the two surfaces. And why that's important is when I go to grind it flat, the only thing I'm going to be grinding is the weld. And that's the same with all of this. Only ever grind the weld, because I don't want to make the metal on either side thinner. So if you've got lippage, as in if one piece is higher than the other, then you're going to run out of weld before you start hitting the other piece of steel. Whereas if you leave your gap, and I've got a 1 mil gap here, and you weld it through there and have 0 lippage, when I weld this flat, the weld will have filled the joint, I will have had penetration as we've seen before, and I'll be able to grind it almost perfectly flat. Now there's a trim going through here, and there's going to be a bit of body filler, so I'm not worried about it being absolutely perfect, but it'll be pretty good. There will be a little bit of warpage or distortion, it's inevitable. Areas like this you've got to be careful of, sharp corners, people will comment about that no doubt. Curves are always good, yes, that's true. So up here, I've welded, so what I'm doing, I haven't yet, so these welds here were just to pull the two pieces together, and this part was sitting a bit low, so you saw me weld on in a couple of spots just a scrap piece of metal so that I can use it like a handle to pull it up. I didn't want to push this down because this is the shape that it needed to be. This was just sort of pulling down in the middle a bit, so what I did, I left this where it was and I pulled the other up to join it so that it's conforming to its shape rather than the other way around. Otherwise I'd end up with a belly or a sunken bit in here. So what I'm doing here next, I'm going to run my grinder along here. I'll cut through that weld. This one's now holding it in place. That one's holding it in place. This is in the right place. This is one thickness of metal too high. Lippage. So I'm going to run my grinder along here right the way to there, and then with my screwdriver, which magnetic screwdrivers are really annoying, I'm going to carefully just lever it up, lever this piece up to this height without distorting or buckling anything, and then just put a tack and hold it there. And you'll constantly see me doing this, and that's to make sure that it is spot on. And if it's not, and there was one back here that wasn't, just here somewhere, I had it good on one side, had it good on the other side, wasn't happy with the middle, just cut the spot weld and it popped into place, and then it was perfectly true. So I'll go along here and I'll do that. And also the spot welds and I'm just taking my time. I can touch this at any point in time. I wouldn't put my finger straight on a weld after I've done it, but I can put my finger, say, there or there after doing that weld and not feel any uncomfortable heat. So I'm going to keep going through here, right the way up, and we'll get all those tacks in. Then once the tacks are in, then it's a matter of very methodically, slowly, patiently going through and joining those tacks up. So, this is what we have. Just an interruption. It's funny living on acreage, because at some point everyone has to mow their lawn. So when you're surrounded by acreage, there's always someone mowing their lawn. It could be me, but normally there's someone mowing their lawn. Okay, so what I've been doing is going along. I did a bunch of tacks and they were a couple of inches apart, 50 mil apart. Then I went in between those about every 25 mil. Then in between those, so about every half an inch, 12 mil, whatever. Then I'm going along and doing 3 tacks, 1, 2, 3. And if you look carefully, one goes on top of the next, goes on top of the next by about a half. And that way you don't end up with pinholes. Now I did see a pinhole there a minute ago, somewhere, just there. So right there is a pinhole, and that's because I've done some welds and I haven't joined those together yet, because it might have required a 4th spot. Now if I'd seen that, I probably would have done a quick spot, but I'll fix that up. What I've been doing the whole time is putting my hand on the metal. Now what you find is that I've been touching this with bare hands the whole time. This here, what I noticed was, even though I was doing the same distance, the same spots and everything, this corner was getting really hot. Why? Because you can feel the heat moving down. The rest of the metal, the cold metal, becomes a heat sink. So the same up here. I haven't really been touching this that much, but I've been using down here as a guide. So what happens is you put heat here and here and here and here, it will all soak down into the rest of the metal. And that's when, if you get too much heat, you start getting distortion. So I was going from here over to here to here, here, letting it sort of soak. Now, if there's going to be heat, there's going to be heat. And it's been said that you'll always get some distortion, but you can control it. And I couldn't agree more. But so what I was trying to do is, if it felt particularly hot here and cool here, then I'd weld here. Not only so that this didn't get hotter, but so that this could catch up to it. So it was pretty much consistent right the way across. Consistent heat, consistent warpage, consistent shrinking back down. So, and this is why there's a concern with things like this. It can't shrink as consistently, whereas a curve or rounded corners will do that. So I just need to go through and finish some of these spots. I'll go through and do those, and then we will give it a grind. As far as your grinding goes, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. You can use a flat disc, you can use sanding discs on your grinder, or you can use a grinding disc. Whatever way you do it, I find that the easiest, or the best way to do it is to go through and just take the surface off everything using whatever you're using flat. What I mean by that is I've got this flat disc. Not sure what the grit is, it's probably about 80 grit or something, 60 grit. Lay it flat like that, and don't let the disc touch any other part of the metal, just the weld, and take the bulk of it off. And then after that, then you come back and you start using the very tip, and I'm exaggerating this, the very tip, because being round, there's one point that will be in contact while the others aren't. And you can very carefully, hopefully the wind doesn't blow my camera over, you can very carefully go through and clean that up like that. So I'll put you on time lapse now. That's what I'm about to do. Flat, then I'll go like this. I'll use a flat disc. I could use a grinding wheel as well. That grinding took exactly 13 minutes. So you can see there, absolutely, you can see a little bit of lippage through here. That is about 1/4 of the thickness of a piece of steel, to give you an idea of some of that lippage. I also just went through and ground off some of the welding splatter. And just on that, see all those marks here? That's where the paint's been burnt. That's from the welding splatter, and obviously your grinder's going to do that as well. So if you're not replacing that paint, if you're not repainting it, cover it. And again, the same burn that happens on that paint would happen on your glass. And it could happen on your chrome as well, so just be aware of that. So what have we got? This is great. I can feel it's a little bit high through the weld, like it actually crowns up a little bit through most of it, as in the shape comes up and then goes like that. Just through there, there is a trim that goes there, remember? I've got a couple of pinholes, I can see a couple there. So I'll go through and just spot in a couple of those pinholes. Not a cut, yeah, there's no cut there that I thought was a texture mark. And it actually sinks down a little bit through here and sinks down a little bit through here, just a little bit. I'll see if I can show you. So you can see there, in millimeters, that is about 1.5 millimeters. So the thickness of one of those grinder discs. So there's pretty much nothing there. There's a little bit just there. And up here, as I said, it crowns. Now it's supposed to crown, but when you see that, that's a bit more than it's supposed to have. And through here, it there is, you can see it does it there, but there's a bit of a sunken through there. So not much I can do about that because I can't get into the back of this to hammer and dolly or anything like that. So I'm happy with the shape all through there, but through here there's got to be a bit of body filler. In reality, be a couple of mil. That's okay. And I know that I actually bent this when I was trying to readjust the flange up here. Unfortunately, there's going to be a little bit of body filler as a result of that as well. But at the end of the day, this thing was rusted out and horrible before. And I've started putting some weld here. Both ends of the door I've got to build out a little bit. Once I got this in place, then I found that I was in a little bit on this end, and as I showed you earlier, I was a little bit in on this end. I think I managed to creep up on this a bit, but at the expense of this end. That's okay, we can deal with that. So I think you can tell just by that, you can't hear anything grabbing. That is pretty close to perfectly ground flat. I've got to now go through and identify some pinholes. I could put a torch in behind this. I'll correct that. If I could put a torch in behind this, it would help, but I can't. So I will go through, fill my pinholes, and then I'm going to flip it over. I just got to do this part. I've got to weld the corners that I haven't done. Remember, I did that angle. Got to just put a tack on those corners. I'm not welding around the edges on the inside. It holds in place with that lip that's there. I will tap the edges in and make them flusher, and then there will be some seam sealer around there. Moving along very well. I've just sat that big fat trim in place. I forgot how wide it was, and it'll need a little bit of panel beating and dressing up itself, but you can see why I chose to do that repair. The dent just there. Why I chose to do that repair where I did. It's all concealed underneath that. So given the opportunity, I would always suggest to take advantage of something like that. But I think that'll come up just fine. So you can see the end of the door here. As I said, I've got to do a bit on here. I'll do that with fiberglass. I've got that built up with weld. The rest of it, that will be with fiberglass. And I will clean this up. I'm going to fiberglass that. I'm going to put some body filler on it.
even though it's going to be covered by this. Why? Because if someone pulls that off, I don't want it to look like no one cared. I want to do the best job I'm capable of doing. And quite frankly, I'm pretty happy with the job that I've done thus far. So, I need to flip it over and do some other bits there, and there's still that tiny little nothing just there that I need to fix. And side 2 is done. Welded these corners up. I've given it a buzz over with some 80 grit on my DA sander. Just put a little bit of weld here, built this out a little bit, same as I did on the other side, and welded this up and this. And this is that little strip that I ridged inside the door to take out. So that's all there was. As I said, it's about 5mm wide. Came out, full length, no rattles. So I'm keen to get this thing into epoxy as fast as I can now, along with those where they need their epoxy on them. I'm not doing the whole thing in epoxy, only the bare metal bits. I've still got to repair that other small section. Looking at that, I may be able to just weld that up. I'll see, wherever it is. I may be able to just weld it up. But that is pretty much that. Well, this is that part just up near the door hinge, and I thought I'd just cut it out to have a look. And when I did, well, that fell out. So obviously water gets trapped in behind there, and she rusts out. These look like bolt holes or spot welds and maybe a bolt hole. I don't know what they actually do though. So I guess I'll just cut out a little bit more and try and scratch out what I can, but we'll see what that looks like. Maybe just getting the rubbish out of there might be part of the solution. Creep up on it, just keep chasing until you find something decent. So this behind here is not too bad. It's a brace for the hinges again. The top of that brace, I think, that I attached down the bottom. I've just kept cutting back until I've found something that is suitable to weld to. So I've had to come around this corner a bit. So it shouldn't be too hard, it's not a complicated piece. But if you haven't got one of these, then get yourself one. This is a air hacksaw. Now obviously they're fantastic for getting in and cutting awkward shapes. There's only so much you can do with an angle grinder before you start running into obstacles, like the things you're trying not to cut. But this thing, you can get into tight areas and so on. This has got a broken blade at the moment, but what it's also good for, and I'm going to make a bit of noise here, so what I'll do, I'll bring you back, but I'll give you a demo. Now, completely not the correct application for that tool, but what I'm using it as is like a jackhammer or a needle scabbler. So it goes in and out, and it's basically cleaning the rust off the surface, but I'm also able to get it in between the two layers to clean out any remaining rust and stuff that's there. Now, I can't see what I'm doing, but I can see stuff coming out because I'm going to clean this all up back to bare metal. I'm going to rust convert it, and then I'm going to put a patch over it. What it just means is that I've got good metal that I'm confident I can weld to here that isn't too thin and rusted, and then I'm confident that I've got out something behind what I can't see that I couldn't have got to otherwise. So yeah, just a little tip. Buy yourself one of those, they're useful. I gave that area a clean up with the flailing wheel of death. If you've ever used one of these things, you know what I mean. Wear personal protection. Wear a chain armour if you have to. Anyway, so I gave it a good clean up, and I've painted some rust converter on there. So it's doing its thing that it needs to do. And while I was on the wire wheel, I actually went over and sort of cleaned up some areas here. Actually, I'm going to rust convert that. And that. And while I was doing that, because that thing is so good at its job, it found some more rust. So these areas here, I'm just going to see if I can weld them in. So just fill them with weld. I'll probably just continue to blow holes, but I'm glad I did that. It's obviously sitting just in a cavity. It's coming down from that way, sitting on in a cavity in between that thick brace and this metal, and just covering up. So if I was going full job here, I'd probably cut all this out, clear that out. That ain't happening. Well, you guessed it, another patch made. So I was able to fill this part in with a whole heap of weld, and this one here I started welding it and it was just blowing holes. So I just picked up that piece of metal that I was using as a handle before, and we shaped that and put it in there. So it's got to grind that up, it'll come up okay. And then over here I have recycled my template from earlier and made a new template. So this piece here, this is what we have. I'll go and straighten that out, flatten it out, cut a piece of metal that size, and then start putting some folds in it. You can see the rust converter doing its thing there. That became that, which became that. Now, as you can see, that's not going to fit because it needs to be bent. So, I'm not going to get too complicated. I'm going to find a piece of pipe or something and just bend it to the shape I need. I decided even that would be overthinking it. So what I've got is that this fold starts from here, so exactly where that notch is, because that's where it changes. And then I've just gone here and just put a pen mark where my finger is there to show where else it was. Transferred those two marks onto the metal. Now all I'm going to do is just put it in the vise and try and bend it by hand. So you can just see the black marks just there, just in the vise. So I'm using it as my anvil. So now I'm just going to try and bend this over by hand. What I'm hoping is that it doesn't make it too sharp. So I'm trying to avoid hitting it with a hammer so that I get a bit of a curve into it. I may have to just hit it with a rubber mallet on this end, I think. I don't want a sharp mark in it. That's better. Using rubber because it's a little more passive, I guess. So hopefully that is right. Let's see. And there we have it. Truth be told, it was a little bit out on that end, so I went and flattened it out again and just bent it. It's only metal, so that took about a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'll just finesse it. I've got a trim in this corner just here, and then once I've got it sitting in nicely into the corner here, then I'll just check it. I'll tap it down. As you can see, when it was sitting there, it needs to come down just there in that area. So once I can get it fitting in that corner, then I can actually just manually bend it, tap it down and so on. As long as I can get it to fit in there, because after I have got a bit of a fitment up, I can start welding it, and as long as I get it all right here, I can tap it down into place. Once it's welded, then it'll hold its shape in certain places. I can tap it down, bend it, and if need be, run the grinder through on that edge like you've seen me do before and weld it up. This is a non-contact area, so there's nothing here that's going to directly contact anything, so if it's not identical to the shape it was before, it doesn't matter, but it'll be pretty close. Well, that's done. I'm going to get that into epoxy tomorrow. That and the little bit that I did on those, I think that's 4 days work. So if you work it out, that's about $3,500 repair. Luckily no one's paying for it. Let's have a look. So those pockets, well, that pocket came up really well. I'm happy with that. Bit hard to grind in here to clean it up, but there'll be seam sealer along here as there was from the factory, so that's okay. I'm not sure if that's a high spot there or not, but I'm not going to keep grinding it. Be a hinge just there, no one will ever see it. So that's come up really well. This part here come up better than it was. It's a bit ugly, but same thing. There'll be a hinge there, bit of seam sealer, a bit of fiberglass and so on. And I just went through and put some rust converter on a couple of spots, and then I've sanded it back off because I only want it really to be in the pits. It's got phosphoric acid in it, and epoxy doesn't work well with phosphoric acid. So I put it on, neutralised it, took it back off. I put another weep hole in this door, and this one didn't have one there because we did that end, and I just enlarged that one as well. Obviously there's an issue with these things as far as drainage goes, so I don't think it can hurt to make those holes bigger. That is a wrap. We'll get that into epoxy. Whether that'll be part of this video or not, I don't know, but super thrilled with that. I am just looking, there is a captive nut missing from there, so luckily we can get in there, so we'll have to weld a nut on there before we get too far so that we can actually mount the door fully. Well, here we are at the other end of the video, and netted up a fair bit of work on that door. Still not finished, getting close. In the next video, it'll be in epoxy. Well, that and the other door and the cow will be in epoxy. And I don't know, by then I may have even got some fiberglass and some body filler on there. We'll see. I'll find out when you find out. You'll have to join me to find out though. So I hope that you're enjoying what I'm sharing with you here. It's all good fun. It's progress. And one thing to bear in mind with this, we could have bought a door. Well, if we can find one, we could have bought a door. Would have been faster, would have been cheaper, wouldn't have been as much fun. Well, it probably wouldn't have been cheaper because no one's paying for any labour here. If labour was involved in this, it would have been a very expensive process. But isn't that what building cars yourself in the shed is all about? Doing it yourself, saving a buck and not necessarily worrying about the time? It is for me anyway. This is therapy, keeps this thing in order. I want you to go and pick up an angle grinder, cut something, but stay safe doing it. I'll see you on part 3 of Clive the GMC's door rebuild. Be good.